And I'm going to get us started by reading the statement that we have to read at the beginning of every meeting. So, the governor has declared a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and the nature of this declared emergency makes it impracticable or unsafe for the Charlottesville Admiral MPO Technical Committee to assemble in a single location. This meeting and the required public hearings will be held utilizing electronic virtual communication with the Zoom software application. In accordance with virtual meeting procedures and policies as outlined in item 4.0-01 of the Virginia State Budget, HB 29, as effective April 24th, 2020. The meeting will be recorded and made available to the public at our website. All right. The next thing we usually do is take attendance. So, you know, I have the list of participants. I think we're going to skip the taking attendance part. Sandy, is that all right? Is there any reason we have to legally do attendance? No? Okay.
We have the list.
We have the list. That's what I thought. Okay, so I will hand it over to Rory. Rory, we do have like some big news about Chip leaving, but we can discuss that in the staff updates, or we can just kind of add it in after our meeting minutes are approved or not approved. So I'll leave that up to you as our chair.
Yeah, let's go ahead and do matters for the public and the meeting minutes first, and then get to that.
Great.
Okay, so matters from the public. Do we have any members of the public here? Don't think so. So let's go ahead to approval of the draft meeting minutes. I do have one tweak. My name is still spelled Stolzelberg once, but it's the only change I got. Anyone else has any amendments? I would entertain a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
Aye.
No.
I'm a no vote because I wasn't there.
Tim is opposed.
I'm not opposed. I'm not opposed.
Oh, he is not voting. He's abstain. I got you. Okay.
Actually, there's a difference between abstain and no vote. I'm a no vote.
Oh, interesting. Good to know. We heard a no vote. Well, yeah, sure.
Just to clarify, there's been a change on the committee membership. So Mr. Keller is that correct? Mr. Keller, you're taking Julian's
That's correct.
spot. So just to clarify for everyone.
And Daniel Bailey is taking my spot on CTAC.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Tim, our new member.
Thank you.
Good to have you here. I guess, Jessica, do you want to do an update with the big news that surely no one has heard yet?
Yeah, so as you all know, I'm assuming Chip Boyles has taken a position as the interim city manager for City of Charlottesville. So yay for Chip. We're very excited for him, although we're sad to lose him here. In the meantime, Christine Jacobs is going to step in as our interim director. That's as much as I know. Sandy, did you want to say anything? Christine, I know you're on the call, but you asked to just listen and learn. I don't know if you want to unmute yourself and say anything. So I'll hand it off to Sandy real quick.
Yeah, no, the only thing I'm going to say is obviously, you know, there are a lot of initiatives that really Chip has sort of had a really clear vision for. We're going to keep moving forward. We're going to keep doing what the MPO does. Obviously, we don't know exactly how our workload's going to change. We're going to figure it out. We just ask for you guys to be patient with us. We'll do the best we can. There are a lot of things that a lot of us are going to be learning very quickly about things that we haven't been involved with yet. So yeah, we'll keep things moving forward. Hopefully you won't notice much of a difference, at least in, you know, operations and practices and things like that. But some of the projects may take a little bit longer to get moving as we sort of, you know, deal with any number of other things that might have to come up first. But we just want to mention it too. You know, you're welcome to ask questions. We'll, you know, be figuring things out as we go. So we're happy to hear suggestions, feedback. Again, just be patient with us in the short term. Christine, do you want to add anything or
No,
introduce?
I'll just add that I'm here to listen and learn and do whatever I can to support all the initiatives that we've got going on. Obviously, as Jessica said, I'm here in an interim role and will do anything and everything I can to make sure that we have continuity of service and that we maintain the really good work and a lot of the really new things that are ahead of us at PDC.
Great. Well, thanks to staff and thanks for handing over Chip. Your loss is our gain. So we're excited to have him here and hopefully we make some good progress. Also, I believe he's the full city manager, just with a possible end date for maybe hiring a new one. But hopefully he sticks around too. Yeah, again, good to have him. So next up on our agenda is going to be membership and bylaws. You all reviewed the membership roster, which seems may have to change, and have any changes to the bylaws. I see we still have Julie in there and not Tim, so we'll swap that out.
Yeah, so I'll just pop in here, Rory, if that's all right. So I asked you guys to take a look. Membership is kind of a weird thing with MPO Tech. So what I want you to do is just take a look at this page, and like Rory said, with the exception of Julian, switching over to Tim Keller, make sure that your name is on here if you believe you are a voting member, and make sure that your name is spelled correctly. We want to make sure that this page is as up to date as possible. Let's see. The reason membership is such a confusing thing for MPO Tech is because the bylaws are quite old. I'm going to move over to the bylaws page. So if you've read our bylaws recently, Sandy and I were poring over this membership section. I'm just going to read it to you guys. The voting membership of the technical committee shall be composed of 3 members each, designated by and representing the city and the county, which I think we have. 1 designated by and representing the department, which I believe is the Department of Transportation, so VDOT, and we have Chuck. And 1 designated by and representing the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. And there we have Wood. The technical committee will also include 1 voting representative each, designated by and representing the University of Virginia, which we have, Jaunt, which we have, the A95 review agency, which Sandy and I don't think we were sure what that meant.
That's you guys.
Yeah.
That's us. Thanks, Wood. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
Charlottesville Transit Service, which we have, and any appropriate agency as determined by the MPO. So with that last clause, you can see that we have a lot of flexibility if there are any agencies that are determined appropriate to have membership on our MPO Tech committee. So I think this is something we can think about. We don't have to make any major decisions today, but if people feel that there are organizations that are not that should be represented at MPO Tech and are not, let us know and we can look into adding those agencies.
Yeah, I mean, 2 comments I'd make. Well, 1, since 2001, Charlottesville Transit Service is now Charlottesville Area Transit. Not the most important change, but certainly has changed. Second, in the non-voting members, there's something called the Representative of the Long Range Plan Citizen Advisory Committee, which I couldn't find anything about on the internet. So I'm assuming that went by the wayside shortly after the last millennium.
I actually believe that has transitioned to the CTAC, to that group.
That makes sense. Okay, great. Well, yeah, so if we are going to do a bylaws update, it might be nice to update the names of those organizations.
Agreed. Yeah.
Also, be sure to look at the 3C agreement to make sure that you have everybody listed that is spelled out in that agreement as well.
Thanks, Wood.
Are these non-voting members optional, or should we be pursuing filling these roles?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, so thinking about the Long Range Plan Citizen Advisory Committee, which is now CTAC, we do have a member who is our vice or our chair of that committee is appointed to come and attend this meeting. But those are citizens who are usually at work at this time, so they often don't come. So yeah, we can have those people appointed. It's no guarantee that they would show up.
So, yeah, I mean, it seems like certainly the FAA and FTA and even the airport authority, we haven't had a member from them in a long time, right? Should we expect that they might want to and might just not be aware that they have non-voting members, or?
Yeah, that's a good point. I can reach out to folks at the airport maybe and see what's going on there.
Hey, Jessica, Lucinda can verify this for me, but I believe several of those are also non-voting members of the policy board as well. So it's also possible that that's where they're plugging in. I don't know about the FTA or the airport authority.
We have a member from the FTA. I don't know if they've ever been to a meeting that I've been at. We don't have anybody from the airport authority on the MPO.
Cool.
FTA generally does not attend. They do receive the packets and stuff, and occasionally may weigh in if there's something that they want to address in a meeting packet or something like that.
Thanks for that info, Stephen.
Speaking as the jaunt representative, we'd definitely be interested in having the airport more involved, since our service goes closest to the airport right now. And last year we started working with Greene County, so it's possible that our service in that area will grow further. It'd be interesting to know what our options are for collaborating with the airport.
Great. So that sounds like some work for us to do on our end. Rory, I think the question for the rest of the group is, do you guys want to do more of a deep dive into these bylaws, or if you've already looked them over, is there anything in particular that you'd like to revisit as a committee?
Yeah, I didn't see anything objectionable in there except for some stale names. But does anyone in the group have any corrections they'd like to make, or did you guys get a chance to look at it?
Well, I'd like to get some clarity on part of Article 2. So in the list there, you've got the committee will, and then number 2 is cooperate in the development of the procedures for the collection of traffic data and reassignment of traffic. So I had 2 responses to that. The first is traffic data is one kind of data and an important kind of data, but I don't think it's the only kind of data. And I was wondering, is this too specific? Is this going to limit us in any way to working with other kinds of data? And my second reaction is, what does the reassignment of traffic mean?
Sandy, can I hand that off to you at all, or do you have any comments?
My first comment is that I feel like a lot of other parts of this plan, this is a relic that probably we need to really think about. I do think this is kind of specific because the MPO hasn't traditionally really been involved with the development or collection of traffic data. I think we can certainly, I think that's a role that we could participate in. I don't know that we want to call it out as a specific role, since it seems like that is not maybe the most effective use of what we can be doing as a regional body in terms of the role that we've traditionally played and what other departments are doing. I would suggest we either think about how we could generalize that a little bit more. I mean, we're already talking about the transportation plan. I think maybe what might be more appropriate would be to, instead of talking about data, to talk about resources and access to resources and information more generally, maybe something like that. Or else, if you're looking for a temporary fix and that's something we need to think about a little bit more, we could remove it temporarily with a big asterisk that we need to come back and think about what that second sub point really should be as far as defining our role.
Sandy, if you don't mind, I'll make a quick comment on that.
Sure.
I think I would appreciate, I don't think it's something major that we need to deal with, but that probably could just be generalized a little bit. I don't know why you need to be so specific about it. It's obviously referencing the modeling work is part of the long range transportation plan. And the reassignment of traffic is really just determining which roads we're saying are going to get that traffic. But that's really done by through the modeling process. So it seems way more detailed than I think you need to have in this document.
I'm
Do you have any
reminded a little. Go ahead.
Oh,
Jessica.
go ahead, Stephen.
Okay, I'm reminded a little bit of streetlight data. I know that that was a data source that the PDC got access to. So maybe a way to generalize this point would be talking about identifying and promoting access to new sources of data.
My
Perfect. Thank you for
recommendation
suggesting
is
that.
keep your bylaws as simple as possible and really think about what the core function of the technical committee is. And that's really to do these meetings, to do the collaboration, kind of intergovernmental communication, and define the do's and don'ts of the MPO through the other documents related to it, the long range transportation plan, the unified work program, and things like that. I don't think you guys really need to get into all sorts of details about data and stuff in bylaws, because that doesn't really fit in this location per se. I just put a link up to Roanoke's TPO, their tech committee's bylaws, and they're like 3 pages, really just focused on who the membership is, how the meetings are run, and what the core functionality of the committee is. So it might be worth just, as you guys move forward with this process, just kind of doing a quick lit review and seeing what other folks have included in theirs and stuff like that.
Thanks for that advice. How does the committee feel generally about scaling back the bylaws to make them more general? How do people feel about that?
Tim?
I think it's a good idea. I wonder if you could actually just use the first, second, and last sentences in this purpose category.
Agree. I was going to suggest the same thing, that you could cut about half, the second half of that out, I think, that whole purpose. Because that last sentence, when it says the committee shall integrate land use and environmental considerations, I mean, I think that generally covers all the work we're doing.
So just stop after land use and the environment and cut the rest out. That.
Great. Are there any other comments about the bylaws in general?
My one last comment is that, because you guys are the A95 Intergovernmental Review Agency, you guys should have a voting member, which I don't think we have for you. So now that we know that, I guess you can figure out who that's going to be.
Yeah, I think we, Sandy, it sounds like you were assuming that Chip was our voting member, but we didn't have him listed. So yeah, we will come up with a voting member. I think additionally, hearing no other comments, I'll take what you guys have said. I will make some revisions to the bylaws and have it for you guys in your next meeting packet, so you guys can take a look at those recommended revisions. Otherwise, that's all we really needed to cover for this section. So thanks, Rory.
Yep, that sounds great. Yeah, this is a big update, guys. The next one, I guess, won't be till 2040. So year turnaround on that. All right, so next up will be the TIP amendment for the Belmont Bridge. Do you have Lucinda?
Hi, I'm going to share my screen. So this memo was in your packet too. Can you see it? Okay. And we're going to make an amendment to the Transportation Improvement Program, the TIP. The Belmont Bridge project, the Route 20 bridge replacement, the cost of construction is increasing. So we're adding about $6 million to that amount. So in the memo, there's the new block and then the old block, and it just shows the amount, the total cost has gone up. It's a pretty standard amendment. It's in alignment with the State Transportation Improvement Program, and we need to have the policy board vote on it. So I'm hoping that this committee will make a recommendation to the policy board on approving or not approving it. And the staff recommends that you approve the amendment. Any questions?
Any questions from the committee?
Is that funding coming from local match, or is that coming from the State of Good Repair?
Chuck, do you know that?
It's a combination. It's federal dollars. There's a match to the federal dollars, but I don't think it's local. It'll be funded through state funds. But like I said, there's a state match to the federal dollars. So basically, this is all federal dollars, and then whatever our match is to those federal dollars. But we need to actually get this approved. The project's supposed to go to advertisement, and this will hold up advertisement of the project for construction if it's not approved. So we need to get this approved this month.
Hey, Chuck.
Yes.
This is actually a change in local funding. It doesn't change our state or federal dollars. It's just increasing the estimate. And Belmont was advertised yesterday. What this will do is hold up award of the contract. So we have received permission from FHWA to advertise.
Yeah, that was we went through the process, got the conditional approval to advertise it.
Correct.
With that stipulation.
Yes, but we do need to approve this as soon as possible. So the state or the city moves to approve this TIP amendment.
We have a second?
I second that.
All right, staff, could we call the roll? Or can we do just an approval vote?
Why don't we just try doing an approval vote? If we
Okay.
hear otherwise, we can go by person.
Great, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions or no votes? All right, the motion carries. And could I ask staff, or Jeanette and Chuck maybe, what's driving the cost increase? Is it just because, it's kind of gotten higher over time, construction costs has risen, or?
It's just a conglomeration of things. It had to do with the increase in construction estimate pricing that we've seen over the last few years. That's dipped down. We're not sure if that dip is going to hold.
Great. Well, thanks so much for all your hard work. It's great to see the Belmont Bridge finally going to happen. Well, thanks. So next up is our performance and safety targets.
So that's me too. And I think you probably remember the last meeting, we had a discussion about the safety targets and some presentations from OP. And so with some more thought and consideration, the staff is going to recommend that we adopt state targets for all of our performance measures. I think at this point, we're not in a position to recommend alternative targets, and also the MPO is not in a position to make any significant changes to the performance of those assets being measured. So there's not really any reason for us to adjust the targets. So I'm recommending that we just adopt the state targets and continue with the state program. There's a paper along with this, that the performance targets overview, that explains it more in depth, and I'm happy to answer questions and discuss it further if you guys have questions. So I'm hoping that this committee will recommend that the policy board adopt the state targets.
Do we have any questions or comments from the committee? Tim?
Just as the rollover from CTAC, I think that more the questions, and we had a new member who just joined who was retired transportation engineer from UVA. The questions were not so much in challenging the standards as that difference that there was between what the standards were and what was being met in that report. Lucinda, could you maybe refer back to that? That was really the question and issue there. And I'm just bringing that forward because it's a related group and you all might want to think about it. I'm in support of, and just for the record, I'm in support of what staff is suggesting now.
So I think, Tim Keller, what you're talking about is the safety performance targets, and there is a large difference in some of the projected trends for the MPO area versus the state target area, or the overall state. And you can see in this chart here, like the fatalities for the state is increasing, and the fatalities for the MPO is projected to decrease. But I've been told by the engineers that most likely it will also go along more with the state targets. So that is a consideration that the committee can think about. We can, make adjustments. If you want to make a recommendation to staff, we can make that recommendation to the policy board. It just seemed like the MPO is not in any position to make any significant changes that would affect this performance. So we didn't think that we should be kind of stepping outside and making our own targets if we weren't going to make any effective changes to them. But, it is, I guess, the last time we set these targets, there was a discussion among committee members that why would we make our goal to increase fatalities? You should have like a zero, a zero tolerance policy for that. And that's kind of a choice of the committee if you want to do that or not. And I have no, I'm kind of neutral in the whole thing.
And can you remind us, what are the consequences of not meeting the targets? Is it set so that things are contingent on them?
So there's no financial consequences for the MPO. And the state makes their targets and gives their targets to the FTA, and the FTA measures the state on the state targets. So there's also no consequences if we set our own targets and those targets are not met. The state and the FTA are not looking at those targets. However, the MPO will have to write a reason why we didn't meet the targets and what we're going to do to meet the targets in the future. And that's kind of where I got caught up, because we don't really have a budget. We're not going to be making transportation projects. There's not a lot of decisions or financing that the MPO has control over. So there's nothing that I could say that we would do to affect a change to meet our targets. If we say we're going to meet the state targets, then we can say, the state is doing X, Y, and Z to meet their targets. And that kind of allows us to say, we're participating in the state program and we're following what they do.
Do the targets fit into like the scoring for the long range transportation plan at all?
I don't believe they do currently. However, the state will be choosing projects based on some of these targets. So we probably will want to align the long range transportation plan with the targets more than it currently is. They're still relatively new, so I think that when the original, well, the long range transportation plan that we have now, the current one, was kind of around the same time that the targets and performance measures were being established. So I think, this round, the LRTP will be more aligned with them. That is the one place that we could, kind of have an influence or a participation in these targets is in our LRTP. We could, prioritize our projects aligned with these targets. So that is something that we could say that we're doing. And it's not, there wouldn't be any consequences if we decided to go with our own targets and not meet them. We just have to say, why we did it and how we're going to try to meet them. And within our means, I guess it would be prioritizing the projects in our long range transportation plan, and then maybe prioritizing our smart scale applications along with the targets as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly my implication and kind of my view of how regional transportation policy should be run is that we should be prioritizing reductions in fatalities and serious injuries over, bridge deck condition and ride quality. And it's, a little bit disturbing to me to see the state targets having 2 extra fatalities and 53 extra serious injuries, more than double the serious injuries. So, I mean, I would certainly lean towards the alternative targets, but I'd be interested to hear what the rest of the committee thinks, especially the real traffic engineers.
We do focus most of our efforts on safety over congestion. If you look where most of our projects are, they're addressing high crash locations. So we are focused on that. We look at those crash data on a regular basis to determine where those locations are, and we try to focus most of even our smart scale applications and all of our project efforts are towards those efforts. It all plays into it. The bridges, they're separate pots of money, and on a statewide level, if we don't meet targets or we don't have a reasonable plan for trying to achieve those targets, then we could get forced in on a statewide level by the federal government to focus all of our resources more on those activities, which we're already doing. So I don't know if it's really going to be that much of a change over what we're currently doing. But I definitely agree that with the update to the long range plan, we can have this discussion and focus that on those areas. I know Wood's on the call, and he was part of the group that put together the last long range plan. And we looked at both safety and as well as congestion. And those were the highest priorities for the development of the long range plan. We looked at a bunch of different factors to identify those projects, and then we worked through the process and the committees to identify what those projects are. I think we can have that discussion as part of the next round and moving forward to develop what our goals are for the long range plan and focus in on those projects that provide the best safety benefit as well as address some of the other needs for the community.
I would like to ask about the data that feeds these safety recommendations. I see that we've got tables about the condition of pavement, but I'm curious if other kinds of data can contribute to safety, like mode shift. So if we know that transit is safer or pedestrian travel is safer than driving, is there a way that we could be advocating for mode shift as a way to promote safety?
Based on the state program, absolutely. They basically look at the transportation as a system. They look for the deficiencies, but they wouldn't necessarily, when they're evaluating their programs, they wouldn't necessarily prescribe a solution. So any intervention or improvement that you make would be on the table. I don't know though, based on for this document, I think the place to do that would still be in the long range transportation plan. And just to answer your question, Rory, by adopting these targets, we are not committing ourselves to using these for any specific purpose in the long range transportation plan. The long range transportation plan will still develop its specific methodology for how projects are prioritized. And that's the place where we're gonna have a lot more access to the transportation modeling to know what kinds of system interventions might go into effect. Any alternative, Lucinda can speak to this better, but any alternative target that we're presenting right now is not based on projections, based on interventions. It's really based on current trends. So it's not setting necessarily an aspirational goal that we're going to work to achieve by putting in place all these interventions. It's basically just looking at what's already happening and assuming that that's going to keep happening. So that would be the difference between adopting the state targets versus adopting a local target, is where it's not actually leading to any sort of change in how we're doing transportation planning at this point. I think the most valuable place where we can do that comprehensively and robustly is with the long range transportation plan process.
I'd like to make a couple comments if you don't mind. For one, I think that generally, at least in the county, I can't really speak for the city, but all of our projects are focused on safety. We really don't target a project unless there's an identified safety need, whether that's for pedestrian and bicycle safety or for vehicular safety. We like to see if it hits more than one of those targets. Like if there's a safety issue that's also a congestion issue, which we tend to see pretty often, is congestion and safety are related when it comes to vehicular crashes, especially. So I think that we are already moving towards that. And I also wonder if the state was considering what I think is going to be, and maybe not an immediate effect, but over the long term, an effect on safety, is the new law about not using phones when you're driving. That I can't remember how they refer to it, but you're not allowed to have a phone in your hand when you're driving anymore. And it seems like that's one of the major contributing factors to most of our fatalities in the county is distracted driving. That, and of course, lack of seatbelts. It's surprising how many of our fatalities had a lack of seatbelt wearing, which I think is changing over time. So it seems like we should be moving at least locally towards a greater decrease in fatalities than maybe what the state is. And for that, I guess I'm kind of leaning towards supporting the alternative safety targets that we have instead of the state ones.
I guess one point about especially on the fatality side of these targets, is that data can be very lumpy, because a fatality event is, in terms of the data, an anomaly, because you have, hundreds of millions of successful trips, and then you have a fatality. And in a place like Charlottesville that is relatively small in comparison to somewhere like Northern Virginia, if you could have one accident that could double your rolling fatality rate, because it could involve 3 or 4 people. So those are kind of things to watch out for when looking at this data and trying to interpret and understand it, is that geographically and population wise, you're dealing with kind of a smaller area. So it can be really hard to set a reasonable target. You know, there's a difference, I think, between a target and an aspirational goal. I mean, these targets end up just kind of being these numbers. There are places that have said, you know, our goal is vision 0, but we understand that we have to set a reasonable target, and our reasonable target is X, Y, and Z. I think TPB up in the DC area essentially did that with their targets. So just some thoughts as the committee considers these.
Yeah, I think the word projection makes the most sense. What do we think is realistic to happen?
Yeah, and on that note, you know, the middle column is the projected actuals based on current trends, right? Which matches the alternative targets. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I have two tables, you know, actually, yeah. So yeah, I'm recommending we stick with the state targets. You can't see me pointing at the screen. Wait, you can see my mouse, which is here. These are the state targets, and then this is the trend that is projected for our area, for only the MPO area. And then this would be if, you know, if we decided to adopt our own targets, then we would need to come up with these numbers in this last column here. And I filled them in with this as an alternative, but, you know, I'm open to, if the committee wants to, you know, adjust that, that's fine too.
And Lucinda, can you scroll back up to the, if you're in charge, scroll back up to the state targets that the staff is recommending there?
So these are the same chart. This is what we're recommending the policy board adopt, which is the state targets. So again, the first two columns are the same as that last table. And then this column is what we're recommending, which is the same as the state targets for 2021.
It's better to see if you look at the graphs. I mean, I don't know if you have the graphs available, but toward the latter years, it's starting to trend upwards. So this is looking at a 5-year average. And it's just, I think we haven't seen that effect yet, but we're going to see it. And I think if you look at the next round of data points, it's going to probably show us going to the positive side. And I think that's where the differences are.
So I do have the graphs if you guys want to see them.
Chuck, when you say that you think we're going to go to the positive side, you mean that you think we're going to see reductions in serious and fatal injury accidents in the next like 5-year period as we look back?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at these, see how the trends are dipping down on the lower two graphs. See how they're dipping down, they're going back up. They're dipping down, they're going back up. We haven't seen this caught back up, and this is across the state. So we're going to start to see that. If anything, it's flattening out, but I think we're going to see it start to increase, like it's showing in these graphs.
I also imagine that, you know, during the 2008 recession, we saw that was when we saw a significant decrease in fatal and serious injury accidents. Is it likely that we're going to see that decrease happen as a result of the COVID shutdown and what is likely to be a change in travel patterns over the next 3 years as people tend to work from home more and maybe a slight decrease in overall VMT?
What we're seeing is contrary to that. We're seeing an increase by about 5% in the number of crashes.
Huh.
Which is, we would expect it to drop off, but no, it's not. It's increasing. And it's not that the VMT's gone down. It's just that people are not driving as safely as they were when the roads were more congested.
Yeah, it's a factor of speed is what we've heard from the safety folks.
You've probably also got more risk-averse drivers choosing to work from home because they're risk-averse.
Yeah. So, but like I'm saying, is I think we're going to see the trend start to go up as opposed to negative. And that's why I would recommend to go with the state trends. And we get to review this. It's nothing that's fixed in stone. It really doesn't affect anything we do from a MPO standpoint. And we get to look at this data every year. So next year we can look at it again. I think the biggest thing is how we're going to have this address or affect what we program or what we put in the long range plan, because that's the document that we use for identifying projects and selecting projects that we want to pursue to improve the situation in the community.
So if the long-range transportation plan is the place we should be going to set aspirational targets, and this document is just identifying the projection of what we think is likely to happen, I mean, shouldn't that projection be whatever our best guess is, irregardless of our opinions? I mean, shouldn't the data be justifying whether the recommended or the alternative table is the one we should be going for?
Well, hopefully we can see those trends go negative as a result of what we program out of the long range plan. But the trends are going to be what the trends are based on behavior for the most part.
Chuck, I have a question for you. So it sounds like you're saying that the local projections are based on 5-year averages. Are the state projections based on something different, or are those also based on 5-year averages?
Yeah, they're based on 5-year averages, but the data set is the whole state as opposed to just this MPO area.
So you're saying that the state stuff would just be more accurate because it has more data versus our local projections? Because it sounds like you're saying we should trust the state data more than our local data. And I'm just wondering why that is, if they're both based on 5-year averages.
All I'm saying is that it's representative of the area that you're in, not necessarily the amount of data. I mean, the state data, there's more crashes across the state versus the miles that are traveled because you have a lot that occur in the urbanized areas, the highly dense urbanized areas across the state. We have, in this area, we have crashes and we're seeing the trends start to, I mean, they're following the same track. It's just not as significant of an upturn as what we're seeing across the rest of the state, but we're still seeing an upturn. And we're sort of lagging behind, I guess, is what I'm saying. But we will see it. And Steve and Reed, when he did his presentation, he was showing how the data is trending. I mean, and this is showing what it's doing. So, I mean, we're going to continue to follow this track. And it's not necessarily, like Wood pointed out, it's not necessarily the fatalities, but it's these severe injuries that you need to focus on, because those are the ones, fatalities are more of a fluke, or we can't predict where the severe injuries are going to be. We have a better accuracy on predicting where the serious injuries are going to be. And that's why if you look at the serious injuries, we're seeing it start to uptick on both these graphs. And in the future, it's going to continue to uptick. We're just still have a lot in that lower, on the back side of it, that's still pulling the averages down. But once we get the next 2 years of data, it's going to trend upwards. And that's what this data is showing. If you look at the blue columns, the trends are upwards for the severe injuries. And that's what I'm saying is, in 2 years, we'll be positive. or next year, we could be positive instead of negative. And that's all I was saying.
So even
And
if
then
you
we'll be having to go with those positive numbers as opposed to the negative numbers. So I don't, whether you stay with the state or whether you adopt the local trends, I don't think it really makes a difference.
So while the local trends might be more specific to us, it's a smaller data set. So like Wood pointed out, there's going to be more volatility in it. So if we go with the state's numbers, it might be less specific to us, but it's also a larger data set. So we get a little bit of insurance against that volatility.
Yes.
Has this been like way more discussion than was anticipated for this agenda item?
It's okay. Well, I guess I'm speaking for Jessica.
I
yeah.
anticipated you guys would want to talk about this, so don't worry about that. But we should try to wrap it up.
As an aside, can I express an interest that we have somebody come talk to us in the future about like Vision Zero and what that means for locality and how that might affect the long range transportation plan? Because it seems pretty clear we all have an interest in being ambitious in terms of safety.
Yes, I will definitely add it to my running list of future topics for MPO Tech.
That's probably Stephen Johnson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, we had this discussion when they first came out with the targets for the same reasons, and we went around, and it was basically closely involved in that about the Vision Zero and why don't we set zero targets. I think our initial trends were showing that by 2021 we'd be at negative, have negative numbers on these if you look at the trends in the early parts of these graphs. So but we, at that point, I think we adopted the state targets.
If you guys want to do Vision Zero or, adjust the targets based more on our local data, that's fine with me. I started off on that opinion and kind of got worn down through all of the discussion. So, you have the decision-making power. Like there's not going to be a lot of consequences. So
I'll just say that I mean, I'm not really gonna advocate for either the recommended or alternative scenarios over the other, because I just don't think that it's going to affect what the decisions that we're making. I think we're already working. I mean, as you mentioned, like we can have Vision Zero as a goal, and essentially that is our goal. I mean, I'm always working to try and find ways to prevent serious or fatal injuries in all the work that we do. So that's not going to change whether we say we think next year we're going to have 9 or 7. So I'm saying it doesn't really matter to me. I'm happy to go along with either the alternative or the recommended if someone has a strong feeling on one over the other.
And Tim, did you have a comment?
Yes, I agree with Kevin. I just brought this up because we'd had a really thoughtful discussion at CTAC like we've just had here, and I just wanted everyone to be aware of it. I think as Stephen brought up, I mean, maybe in terms of the long range transportation plan, now that we've had this discussion, this will be something to consider at that point as well.
Yeah, I'm inclined to support Lucinda's recommendation for this document, and yeah, I think we should revisit safety for the long range plan.
Great. Well, if anyone is more than inclined, I would entertain a motion.
Okay, I'll make the motion. I motion that we adopt or we recommend the policy board adopt the state performance targets is recommended by the staff.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Any abstentions?
Abstain.
All right, motion carries with one abstention. Next up on our agenda is the Unified Planning Work Program planning for FY22.
Sure, I'm gonna go ahead and see if, let's see, if I can share my screen.
Thanks, you guys. I appreciate the voting and everything.
Let's see, are you guys seeing a Word document next to a spreadsheet right now?
Yep.
Cool. Okay, so we've started putting together a draft for the 2022 fiscal year UPWP, just looking at what is going to be required for that, what our workload looks like. So you'll see on the spreadsheet, I started a budget that just looks at what work we anticipate that we're going to be taking on, and thinking through what kind of staff resources and other types of resources are going to be required to do that. One of the things we're really trying to do in light of, just learning from this past year, thinking through, me as being new to developing the work program, looking at the new VDOT invoicing, that kind of thing, is we're going to try to simplify the work program so that we can focus on a fewer number of things, but more meaningfully and more intentionally. So we are trying to reduce the overall total number of projects that we're going to be working on, and we think that that will help us both administratively and also just to make sure that we're producing better products. So this is based on assuming we get the same budget that we had last year, which of course we don't know just yet. The work that we're anticipating is a lot of it is the same work that we have to do every year. The things that we're adding in, we're going to continue the North 29 corridor study, which also has a rural component. So we're going to be putting a lot of our resources into that. We're going to be ramping up for the next long range transportation plan update. So we have a small amount basically just to prepare a scope and to determine if we're going to need to retain some technical consultant services to help with that. And then, this is actually very timely based on the conversation you all just had about the bylaws. We're also going to recommend at this point that we undertake a process of doing an MPO strategic plan, also with a consultant agency. And this would really be to help guide, establish a better sense of what we want the MPO's work to really, I don't want to say accomplish, I think we generally know that, but who is our clientele? Whose preferences do we prioritize? Also, as we get the census information back, we're probably going to be looking at a redistricting. So we need to be thinking through how do we incorporate, Greene County, Fluvanna, Louisa potentially into our MPO and define some of that, as well as looking at our committee structure and looking at what makes sense as far as how we're using our committees, what their purposes are, what kind of work do we need to go through. So we think that that's really important. We think that this is a really good time to be undertaking that. While the other localities that aren't currently part of the MPO may be impacted by it, we might be looking at some way for them to at least be involved in that process once we have a better sense of what that's going to look like for redistricting. But I think that that's probably an important conversation to have every now and then. And so we're going to go ahead and recommend that we do that now. So this is the total budget. We get resources from both the Federal Highway Administration and the Federal Transit Administration. This this budget is based on, there's a column, the PL is the Highway Administration funding, and then the FT is a Transit Administration fund. So we get a budget for each of those, and this number right here is the total. So based on, and a lot of these are estimates, based on what we think we're going to spend. So based on that number right there, that 298, that's what I think my best guess is that we are going to be spending on the other activities that we've already listed. And then we're going to compare that to this 322,500. That's what the total budget is for the MPO based on last year's numbers. So assuming it's similar to that, we would have about $25,000 that we could do probably one additional type of study, work, project kind of thing. And so first of all, I wanted to give you all an initial glance just to see you know, what we're already planning, give you an opportunity to talk about that. But then we also wanted to talk about, with that remaining budget that we might have, what would be the most important to you all so that we can develop the rest of the UPWP based on y'all's input. Right now, this is just a discussion. We're not asking for you all to vote on anything. Our hope is that we can take your feedback, CTAC's feedback, the MPO Policy Board's feedback, and develop this into a work plan that you can look at your next meeting in March, and then we'll have a public hearing in May. So this is a goal to get you all sort of thinking about this earlier in the process. Lucinda and Jessica and I brainstormed a little bit. We had a couple of, we tried to think sort of in broad categories, and then we had some more specific ideas within those broad categories. But some of the things we thought that might be helpful for the MPO to be considering as far as that additional work that we would be doing is some sort of policy research type of project. Specifically, we had discussed looking at case studies on successful public and private partnerships where they were able to fund transportation infrastructure through leveraging private investment, best practices for supporting climate action plans, which is a priority both for Albemarle and Charlottesville. And also, I think COVID is showing that there's a rise in remote work. And one of Jessica's suggestions was to look at how more people moving to telework might shift travel demand on the system, and what kind of planning we might need to do around, you know, does peak demand change based on people not driving as consistently to commute to work, that kind of thing. There's also always an opportunity to do some sort of more specific bike ped type of project. We could do another phase of the equity work. We had a lot of ideas around safety. One of them that our staff was really excited about was looking at the relationship between safety outcomes and community socioeconomic demographics. So thinking particularly like how do people that are in historically underserved population density centers, so communities where there's a higher percentage of historically underserved population, how are they able to safely access resources like grocery stores, clinics, pharmacies, daycare, schools, those kinds of things, and is there or document more specifically what those safety discrepancies might look at in some of our areas. I don't know exactly, we haven't scoped that out, of course, but that was one that had a lot of excitement around it, or other safety types of things. So these are just some of the broader categories, and then some specifics within those broad categories that we wanted to throw out for initial suggestions, and just see, you know, which, if any of these or other suggestions do you have that you might be interested in us pursuing a little bit more deeply. And then any other comments generally on these other sort of things that are listed out.
I'm going to take a risk and say my number one concern as a professional planner is plans that get written and sit on a shelf and don't actually drive any outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
As a topic, that would be something I would be interested in learning more about. In our area, do we have plans that are suffering that fate? And having a better understanding of if that's true, why is that happening? And that might help us get more value out of the money that we're already spending on other plans.
So kind of like an audit of existing plans, and then some sort of assessment of whether or not they're being used.
Sure, and if not, why?
Yeah. Any other general thoughts?
I was hoping to hear from the city and the county if there were any kind of areas that we could help out with on a regional level.
I'd like to take some time to think about that, if you don't mind. I'm happy to get back to you in the next week or so, but I think that would be something I'd want to talk through with other members in community development and maybe even some other areas like our equity office, and see if there's some of these. I think you came up with a pretty good list of topics that sounds like you've thought about. I wouldn't mind maybe if you remind us of all of those that you've thought about it to give us some ideas, but I'd rather have a discussion before I make any decisions. And I guess, maybe you could put that money aside as an open item for this, and as when we finally decide anytime in the next year what we want to move it to, we can do that.
I don't know, Chuck? we might have to designate that before May, but well, I don't know.
I mean, just
Yeah, I
like
don't
if
think
you
you can put it
general
in a pot for not spending. You could put it in. I mean, the other thing that we need to consider is when the census data starts to come out and how that's going to affect the MPO and the area it serves.
Oh yeah.
We're probably going to have to look at some of that in the near future. I don't know if it may be next year, but I'm not sure when that data is going to become available. But that could have a effect on a lot of things throughout the MPO area.
But I think to your point, Kevin, I can we can leave it in the first draft of the UPWP until the next meeting, for example, if you guys want to talk about it in more detail at the next meeting. But I think we'll have to designate that when we vote on the UPWP adoption in May.
And I just wanted to jump in to note that I will send out some email summarizing what we've been talking about for this UPWP discussion, and anyone can feel free to email me after you've taken a look at that and been able to talk it over with other people at your organization.
And I agree with Kevin's approach to this. It would just, I guess the overriding piece that I would be interested in seeing is something that would be helpful to that interface between the city and the county, or something that would be an area of joint interest between the city and the county in the spirit of what this committee, I think, is about.
From the city's perspective, and kind of jumping off what Stephen was saying, yes, we do have plans that are sitting on a shelf and aren't being instituted, and it's because there's not enough funding available. So I know the MPO has proposed asking for additional funds from both the city and the county in developing public participation plans for smart scale. And that's going to be difficult to ask at this time. So putting this additional money in the smart scale application is something that we'd be interested in. If we need to come up with a new project that we're working on, then equity, ensuring that there's enough participation from all users, that all users' needs are included in our plans, that would be something that we'd be interested in.
I have a question on the timing of the redistricting. Do we have any idea when we're going to get a sense of how that's going to shake out?
I believe the census population data is going to be available. Would Chuck, you can help me out on this, by next spring? And so we'd probably be looking at a redistricting in the spring, summer of 23 would be when we were having those conversations. Does that sound right to you all?
Yeah, I think so.
I've heard
I mean,
the
like you
redistricting
said,
file is like 6 months delayed at this point, and it might
Okay.
affect, there might be some way to rush it. I've seen some articles indicating it might affect the primary season in Virginia. So, I mean, take from that what you want.
So under normal circumstances, spring, summer of 23. Under current circumstances, maybe the end of 23, 24, beginning of 24.
Gotcha. So yeah, I mean, I wonder if it makes sense to, kick that strategic plan down the road a little bit until we have a better sense of how that's going to shake out, given that, both the composition of our committees and the scope of the MPO is going to change pretty significantly, it sounds like, to add 2 new counties to it.
Yeah, one of our concerns was about doing both a redistricting and a strategic plan at the same time.
Gotcha.
So I mean, we had the same conversation internally as well. I think it's a fair question and something that we can discuss. I don't know how much work an MPO redistricting is going to be. Probably a lot. But but yeah, that was one thing. And Chip's thought on this before, when we didn't know that he was going to be leaving, was it would make sense to sort of have this in place so we could bring the other communities on board, sort of having better information and make sure that we're including them in the process. Not necessarily as a voting member, but make sure they were involved. But I think that's open to discussion as well.
Cool.
Have the projections right. I mean, we pretty much know we're all talking around the edge, but we have a pretty good idea of what the change is going to be, right?
Yeah.
It involves the community to the north and to the north of Albemarle. So it just seems to me that we do have the information, the preliminary information to start planning, even if we're not. I think the last I heard was that the census is supposed to be made public in September.
Okay.
So I guess I would agree with Chip, and we've had some discussions over the last several years about this, that the anticipated changes and some preparation for that would not be, I think it would be timely to be thinking about that now.
Sure.
I'll also remind everybody that while there is the data exercise to this, there is the political part of this, and that it's ultimately a decision of the governor's office on approving MPO boundaries. So, I mean, I guess I'm saying between the lines, if there is that intention to extend to the north to make sure that there is adequate buy-in from politicians at all levels, because that could be what ends up derailing any sort of expansion.
Sure.
There's probably financial questions too. I mean, I wonder if green is, what both Albemarle and the city of Charlottesville contribute, a decent amount of money annually to do this planning. Is green going to be willing to add to that funding to allow us to get the match? And I guess with that, I'd also say, let's be careful that we're prudently using the city and the county's financial resources and not putting them towards planning for green. Whereas I know green, it obviously affects what goes on in Albemarle in the city, but it would be nice to see them maybe start making financial contributions if they want to, have the benefit of getting these having these planning efforts directed towards their community.
Yeah, and whether or not anything changes with the strategic plan to open up funding or not, I'd like to echo Jeanette in saying that I'd like to see an equity focus for any additional program. And I'm particularly interested in equity as it pertains to bike ped planning. There was a great speaker that came to Jefferson School a little while ago, talking about how, we often see bike ped as, people like white people in spandex who are kind of like doing it for fun or whatever. But the people who really rely on the systems are, often minority and often in places where, there isn't really sufficient infrastructure to make it safe. And not to skip ahead, but looking at the bike ped count or the bike counts, a little bit later on in our meeting, it's interesting how the non-white shares are higher and often much higher than proportional to the population for the intersections that are most challenging and most dangerous, whereas like they're lowest in the recreational places like Riverview Park. I'd love to see that as more of a focus of that overall. I don't know if there could be like a specific program. Don't have anything specific in mind, but definitely an interest of mine.
Any other thoughts? All right. Well, I think we'll get some more feedback and we'll develop some more thought out options for you all to look at in March. Thank you.
Great. And thanks, Andy. And next up is staff updates.
Great, thanks, Rory. I'm going to share my screen. So I just have 3 projects that I have something that's wrapping up and something that is just getting started. So first, let's talk about the bike and ped count. So the bicycle and pedestrian count was something that had been on our work plan for this year. I really worked very closely with our bike and pedestrian committee, which is actually more of a bike and pedestrian working group. And together we came up with a new focus for our bike and ped count. So traditionally, bike and ped counts are designed to like look at the entire region or look at an entire city and try to get a really good sense of like how many people are biking and walking in this entire region. And what we did is refocus it. We didn't think that we had the capacity to look at like all of the MPO area. So what we did was pick a few locations in both the city and the county that either have recently had bike or pedestrian infrastructure added or they're going to have bike and pedestrian infrastructure added in the near future, so that we can look at this before and after the infrastructure is added and get a sense of how does that change biking and walking behavior in that area. So we were able to go to, 10 locations in both the city and the county and did a morning and an afternoon count. So these were done at the typical peak periods for travel. So in the morning from 7 to 9 a.m. and in the evening from 4 to 6 p.m. Our volunteers just sat out there and counted people. And they counted the direction that they came from. So what you're looking at right now on the screen is the total for each location. The first column is the daily number of bikes, the daily number of peds. So that's really just adding up how many bikes and pedestrians were counted over those 4 hours, the total of all our alternative mode users, the number of women that went through the area, and the percentage of the total people who went through the area that were women. Same thing with people who appeared to be under 16, people who appeared to be non-white, and people who appeared to have some sort of physical handicap or something like that. This spreadsheet is on our website right now on our bike and pedestrian transportation planning page. You can go and check it out. You can also see all of the different pages. So for every location, there's a lot more detail. So people counted, like I said, what direction the bikes and pedestrians were coming from. They're coming either from the north, south, east, or west. There are a couple of intersections that are a little bit more complicated than north, south, east, and west, and that's clarified on those pages. And then everything is broken down by 15-minute increments. So you can really see like when were people coming through and where were they coming from. I didn't make any summary document or anything for this. I think each of these locations, the information kind of stands on its own, and it's intended to be used by the localities for whatever they see fit, however it helps them make, however it helps them plan. We will go to these same locations in the spring, again with volunteers. I'll put together the information in the same way, and then we can take a look at it again in the spring. Are there any questions?
Tim, and feel free to jump in. No need to raise your hand.
I just always on these transportation and bicycle counts, I wonder why, and I asked this at CTAC as well. It seems to me we have a national, international bicycle route through our region, and that's Route 76. And it seems to me that it should be involved in every count because it plays into a number of different categories beyond just transportation. And we know that there are significant safety issues along that as well. So, I mean, I think that others could say, why not St. Patrick, why not Ragged Mountain? There are a lot of these other pieces. And then finally, a question that came out again from CTAC is, what about real-time satellite imagery for doing counts, picking a point at head trailheads and those sorts of things, and doing it instead of having to have staff go out and make counts?
So let me answer your first question first. So you asked about a couple of different locations and why we didn't count there. So recall that, you know, we had limited capacity to do the counts. So we narrowed it down to these 10 locations. And also the focus of these counts wasn't to really like get a sense of how many people are going through the area total. It was to really look at these particular places because these are places that have bike and ped investment or are about to have bike and ped investment in infrastructure. And that's why we wanted to look at these places. If there was some place along Route 76 that had plans for bike and pedestrian investment in the near future, we would have counted there, but that wasn't a high priority for the localities. And your second question was for satellite imagery. That's just something I'm not super familiar with. You have like some sort of location, like some place I could get that information from, Tim? That's not something I'm super familiar with.
I guess we should talk to VDOT folks, and Chuck was referencing, I think, having something to say about this when one of our CTAC members was talking about that, a University of Virginia engineering professor.
Right. Chuck, would you want to refresh my memory?
Trying to get in. Sorry, I'm listening to the Smart Scale presentation. They're talking about Smart Scale right now.
Real-time satellite imagery for data counts.
Yeah, that's not, I don't know anything about that. Real-time satellite imagery.
I think what Tim might be referring to is there was an app or like a program that you showed us that VDOT had bought in that I think uses like cell phone data for real-time location.
That's the streetlight data that we talked about earlier. And we have included, I think, as part of the current information that they are starting to get the non-motorized vehicle count data as part of the information that we have. You need to compare it to some actual data to aggregate it, to make sure that it's accurate. Because in my experience in using the data, it's not necessarily, especially when you have lower volumes, it doesn't predict it very well. And it seems to be off significant. The higher the volumes are, the better the data is. So I tend to use it on my very high corridors for vehicles, but I haven't really used it for bicycles or pedestrian, even though it has that capability. And I don't know if for our region, if it would be, there'd be enough data to actually make it significant inroads. But I mean, we could look at the data and see what it says.
Yeah, and just to tack on, getting bike and pedestrian data can be really, really tricky. Even the automatic counters that you might have seen around town, which we use, well, the city and the county use, and VDOT. Anyway, even those are not necessarily 100% accurate. There's a lot of little quirks about them where, like, if you have two people walking side by side and they step over the automatic counter, it might only count once. So you lose, half of your people for that time. So one of the things that we are going to do in the spring is try to work a little bit more closely with VDOT to set out the automatic counters at the exact same time that we're having our volunteers out there counting, and then we can verify the data that we're getting from the counters, which I think will be helpful not just to us, but also be helpful to VDOT.
A quick follow-up. I guess I feel that a regional planning entity has the potential to do cutting edge things. And I realize that this is a challenging time to be talking about that. But when I was going to TRB meetings, Transportation Research Board meetings on a regular basis a decade ago, there were places around this country, jurisdictional, usually they were the planning districts as opposed to localities, and the state DOTs that were really starting to think about how to do number counts in all sorts of new and interesting ways. And one was with the phone data that Rory's talking about. Others were with types of real feed video data that are being used by defense contractors who can pull layers of information off and sell it, I think, in some categories. So I guess then this is almost back to your last thing of what might you do with some of those hours that are unapplied for, and think about what are some cutting edge technologies that you might be able to use and then maybe get model funding for that would be useful to all of us.
Yeah, thanks for that suggestion. Absolutely, I am on board with looking at better ways to count bikes and pedestrians. I will just also note, like, even major metropolitan areas are still doing most of their bike and ped counts with volunteers. So we're not so far behind the curve.
And I didn't mean to imply that you're behind. What I want to do is get us ahead.
All right, I like it, Tim. Thanks.
Yeah, to put my software engineer hat on for a moment, I kind of think that, like, approaching this problem, to me, the obvious way to do this in the 21st century is with, like, camera and video data, and just a little bit of machine learning sprinkled on top, probably with off-the-shelf libraries to, like, identify people and bicyclists. But obviously that's beyond the scope of what TJPDC can do. But one thing I might recommend is reaching out to the Center for Civic Innovation right up the street from you guys. They used to host, before COVID, a Civic Innovation Day, which is sort of like a hackathon where people would work on things like that. And they often, like, teams struggle for real practical tasks to work on. So that would be maybe a great thing for that, and not necessarily just for the hackathon, but for they now have a code for Seville Brigade, they call it, that, like, works on different projects. Yeah, so if they have people who are into computer vision and analysis, they might be able to help with that sort of program.
Thanks for the suggestion, Rory.
Yep. Oh, and I'd also note that I think at least 2 of these intersections are on Bike Route 76, the Emmett Ivy and the Ridge Main. So it runs along West Main for that stretch.
Thanks for that. Any other comments or questions about the bike and pedestrian count, either the data or the process or what we're going to be doing in the spring?
I just want to briefly echo some of the things that have already been said. I agree with Tim's ambition of exploring new things. I agree with Chuck that there's limitations to street light. For Rory's comment about the Civic Innovation Day, we were a project, and I think it was really challenging to find. I think the scope of our project for Civic Innovation Day was too big. And so we really didn't end up with something that was enterprise level and able to really go into full operations. So it's just a word of caution I would put in about that. I still think it's worth trying and seeing what we can learn and explore. But I know there are also companies out there that already do vision analysis to do bike and pedestrian counting. So at least knowing like what a price quote would be, I think would be a very helpful starting point to know who's got the budget for that. And then in regards to these counts that we've done, I just want to express an interest in the future that the bike and pedestrian is disaggregated from the rest of the data. So, looking at this and seeing that a lot of these areas have approximately 50% female observations, but in my head, I think there's a bias that cyclists are primarily male. So it would be helpful to know if this 50% gender split is the same for bike and ped, or are we saying a lot more male cyclists and a lot more female pedestrians? That kind of thing I think would be helpful, because the solutions for bike and ped infrastructure I think are a little bit different.
No, your point is well taken, and it was something that was discussed by the Bike and Pedestrian Committee / working group. I think it'll take a little bit of creativity on my end to try to put that all on one count sheet for our volunteers. But yes, your point is well made. Thanks.
And to be fair, I don't think a camera vision algorithm is going to have a very reliable time telling men from women. So we might still need volunteers regardless of what solutions we have in the future. But thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point about just off-the-shelf solutions. Obviously, anytime you can just go buy something instead of trying to get some volunteers to do it, that's going to be preferable, because volunteer work, well, for software stuff, can be difficult to wrangle. I guess my question with this stuff is previous count data like available somewhere? I know we've done counts in the past, but I wasn't able to find it.
Yeah, so there is count data available, at least internally within TJPDC, because they had done counts in several years ago. They were done every other year, and they were done repeatedly at some of the same locations. I didn't find the data that I could find on our Q Drive, and I hope you weren't like part of this, and I don't hope I'm not offending you. It wasn't super organized in a way for me to just run with it. It would have taken a little work for me to make sense of what had been done in the past. So that was part of the impetus for us kind of refocusing this bike and ped count and creating these new locations and having this purpose of looking at, how can we get this before and after data that's going to really be useful to the localities. So yes,
I think you're correct. The methodology changed significantly between each count, and it would be very difficult to compare apples to apples across different counts.
So that is one of the hopes with this new bike and ped count, is that I'm working on really detailed methodology for how this count was done, how we're going to do it again in the spring, so that it'll be done the same way over and over and over again. And if the localities want to look at additional locations on their own, they can follow the same methodology, and hopefully that will be more useful for comparative purposes in the future.
If you haven't done so already, make sure you reach out to John Belichick at VDOT Central Office. He's got some great resources on all of this.
Great. We've been working with Shane Sawyer, but I definitely will reach out to John as well. Thanks.
Yeah, he's John's boss.
And I just want to make one more plug for thinking about a major rural bicycle trail. I'm on 53 almost daily, and there are recreational bicycle folks from the region who use portions of Route 76. But in the summer months, there are folks with their backpack camping gear on their bicycles every day. And I think that this is where we tie into economic development, we tie into a lot of other categories, and part of what makes us special, that we still have these routes we also, just as we have a divide in this nation, we have a divide in people who are respectful for those people on those bicycles and people who are not. And so there are significant safety issues, and I'm not sure how you grapple with it. And again, if this is not the appropriate place, I understand. But in terms of your working group with the bicycle community, I think that this is something that's really special, and that there are real issues and dilemmas that need to be confronted if we're going to have something that is really one of the most special trail systems across America that we have.
Yeah, so Tim, you bring up an interesting point that there's a lot of really great trail work going on in our region, and Virginia has this great example of the Capitol Trail showing how a shared use path that is really long can contribute to economic development in a lot of different areas. I would just caution that, you know, as far as I understand my role and the MPO's role, we are a transportation organization. We're going to focus on bike and ped stuff that is transporting people to the locations in the MPO area that they want to go to as an alternative to driving. And I don't know that a lot of those rural trails like you're describing are what would fall into our kind of bike and ped work.
And I would just say, so far, in everything I've seen, whether it's the Rivanna River Project or whether it's the Rural Roads Project, I don't think that this nationally significant trail has been properly dealt with in any of them. So let's find a way to do it.
Tim, any other comments? Because I do want to move on to one other update. Great. Okay, so my other update, I'm just going to make this one. Okay, so my other update is about transit. So last year about this time, the TJPDC applied for 2 different grants with DRPT to look into transit planning. One of those grant applications was for a Charlottesville and Admiral Regional Transit Vision Plan. So we said the purpose of this plan would be for local leaders, transit agencies, and a wide variety of stakeholders to collaboratively develop a clear vision for the future of transit in our region. The work would result in a Charlottesville area transit vision plan document that identifies goals, objectives, strategies, and time-specific recommendations for local transit. And recommendations contained within the plan will be developed for short-term, long-term, and extended long-term timeframes with a horizon year of 2050, which, if I remember correctly, that is the year that both the city and the county's climate plans talk about going to zero emissions. The budget for this transit vision plan, the whole budget is $350,000, with half of that coming from grant funds from DRPT, an $87,500 match from Admiral County, and another $87,500 match from the city of Charlottesville. Overall, the project is expected to take about 18 months from as soon as agreements are signed to June 30th of 2022. All right. This is a quick timeline for just the next few steps of the transit vision plan. So we are currently like here. We are signing the agreements. We are working on the MOUs. The MOUs with Admiral County and the city of Charlottesville. We are finishing up the scope of work that will be sent out to as part of an RFP to DRPT's bench contracting firms, hoping to do that just before the end of the month. And then in February, we would be hoping to put together a selection committee that will review the proposals and select the consulting team. And March is when we would finally be with the Regional Transit Partnership Group serving as the advisory group. They will meet with the consulting team to approve a final scope of work and begin work. So the second grant, the second project is the Admiral County Transit Expansion Feasibility Study and Implementation Plan. So the purpose of this project would be to create a feasibility study and implementation plan for expanded transit service to population and employment centers within Admiral County, particularly the Pantops area, Thomas Jefferson's Monticello, and along Route 29 North. Innovative transit options to include on-demand service that emphasize accessibility and responsiveness to customer needs should be investigated alongside traditional fixed route options. The budget for this project is $106,215, with about $53,000 coming from DRPT and the other $53,000 coming from Admiral County as local match. The timeline for this project is 12 months, and it has to stick to 12 months because the point of getting that implementation plan at the very end is so that the appropriate agency or organization can apply for funding to actually run the expanded transit service. And they would need to apply for that funding in about January or February of 2022. And again, I have a quick timeline for just what the next few steps would look like. Similarly, we are working on signing the MOUs and the agreements. We are finishing up the scope of work that's going to go out as part of the RFP, again, to the bench contracting firms. February, we'll have a selection committee that, Admiral County is going to be very, very involved in this. They will review proposals and select the consulting team. March is when an advisory group will be set or appointed by Admiral County, and TJBC staff will function as project management, and the advisory group will meet with the consulting team to approve that final scope of work and begin working either at the end of March or the beginning of the next month. So, okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I've got one question on the Albemarle expansion plan. So if it's for expanded transit service to population and employment centers, why is Monticello one of the potential endpoints?
So Monticello is a large employer. They get a lot of, that is what I was told. Guys, I've only lived here for like a year. And that was just the request of Admiral County.
Okay.
Good question. I will also note that Monticello is right near the Piedmont Virginia Community College, so that's another destination.
And I've heard, I mean, I don't know if this needs to be specified now, but the jail is somewhere without any transit service. And I've heard that that is a need. Putting it out there.
Great. Thanks for that comment, Rory. Anything else?
I will add that the jail was recommended in the transit development plan that the city had approved last time to get service to. It was supposed to go all the way down 5th Street to the Mill Creek area there where the Food Lion is. So I'm not sure where that is, if that plan is being implemented or not. But that was something that I think was, as Rory points out, it was a big need that was identified during that planning process that I thought was going to go forward.
Yeah, the plan has been approved and it exists. I think it's going to get be the base for the next study coming up. We also have currently consultant working on some improvements to implement. That's not going to be entirely the TDP from 18, but it's a lot of the elements will be included on that.
And something else I'll add is that with this Albemarle project, if the consultant is looking at on-demand transit, hopefully they can leave us with a sense of not only is on-demand transit as a mode applicable in those specific areas that were mentioned, but we as a region need to have an understanding of when is on-demand transit the appropriate mode versus fixed route versus reservation demand response, so that whenever we're considering expansion to any area, we'll have a sense of which one is the most appropriate so that we're getting the most value out of the operating costs.
That's a great point, Stephen. Thank you. Wood, did you want to make any comments or say anything else?
Nope.
All right, any other comments or questions? You can also always feel free to email me if you think of anything after the meeting. The only other thing under staff updates was going to be the smart scale scoring, but it sounds like, Chuck, we don't have any answers yet. We will talk about that at our next meeting. All right, I'll hand it back to you, Rory.
Hey, Jessica, there was one thing.
Hey.
There was one thing we left off of the agenda that I think we meant to talk to, and that was Sarah was going to give some updates on the telework initiatives, if she's available, that she's working on with rideshare.
Thanks, Sandy. Go ahead, Sarah.
Hi, guys. Yeah, so just real quickly, wanted to let you know, obviously rideshare has done a little bit of pivoting in our main focus this year with the pandemic. And so we have been providing telework resources in conjunction with DRPT and Telework VA. We had some activities in the fall. We were the keynote presenter for the Better Business Challenge with C3, and we're actually gearing up to do another webinar on January 26th. And the main focus for this webinar and kind of our telework initiatives moving forward is letting folks know, obviously, a lot of people and a lot of businesses implemented telework to stay afloat during the pandemic, but it's understanding how telework can work for you moving forward, how your organization can continue offering telework opportunities, how it benefits your business. And there are many free resources that Telework VA is actually providing to area businesses at their request. And so it's going over what is available to the businesses to help them really make the best telework policy and program for everyone in their organization. And it is a deep focus into what are your needs, what are your goals, here's how you can achieve that, here's how you can evaluate if you're achieving it. So that's one of the big focuses that we have coming up. Yeah, next week, so soon. I think that's all the update we have for now. Unless anyone has questions, please feel free.
Sarah, I just saw a note from Chuck that he does have some recommendation on smart scale stuff. So Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, Chad's doing the presentation now to the CTB, and he just went through our district. It looks like they're going to fund, well, they're recommending 20 projects for funding, which basically includes all of the Charlottesville projects, all of the Admiral projects, 3 of the projects in the TJPDC, and 2 of the Charlottesville projects, both Fontaine and Hydraulic 29. The TJPDC projects were the 107 park and ride lot, the 29 shared use path, and the 5th Street hub and trail. And basically all of the city and the county projects. So that's good. I mean, the money, I guess, went significantly up when they went back and looked at the budgeting over the past 4 years. So we got money from every year of the plan that they're going to be able to put into it. So it may be that we could start some of these projects sooner too. So these are the initial staff recommendations. The final recommendations will be out later.
So Chuck, just to clarify, all the city projects that we submitted for the 4 have been funded or recommended for funding by staff.
That's what the screen that I'm looking at, there was like 20, we had 36 projects submitted, 20 of them were funded.
Excellent.
And that included all 4 city projects, all 4 county projects, 3 projects that the TJPDC submitted, and 2 of the MPO projects.
Well, now we're going to have to find new projects, Chuck. This is wonderful news.
I know.
And I posted a screenshot of that slide at the CTV meeting in the chat with the list of projects. Great news. Good work, everyone.
We'll be busy coming up the next 4 or 5 years. Don't know what we're going to do, else we're going to do, but we'll have a lot of work going on.
Well, Chuck, that was a big surprise. I'm glad you were able to update us before our meeting ended.
I'm shocked myself. I didn't realize that there was an additional $100 million, or it was a significant amount. I thought it was going to be 26, but it ended up being like $140 million in projects.
I'll tell everyone that Chuck has been tempering my expectations for like 6 months now, and I'm just very surprised. I'm pleasantly surprised. Well, okay, so that concludes our staff updates. I did have some time set aside for roundtable, but I'm just going to request that everyone keeps in mind that we are supposed to end at noon. So if you could keep your updates succinct.
Great. So a little hard to go around the room, but I guess start with county people. You have any updates for us?
No, I don't think we have any updates at this time. I'll just share that we're really excited about the Smart Scale announcement. If that goes through, that's really tremendous news. So thank you all, and thank you, Chuck, for all of your help on that.
All right.
Ditto.
Wood, do you have any updates?
Sure. Reminder to all the MPOs, just a blanket reminder we're giving that on the transit side of performance measures, the Public Transportation Agency Safety Plan related measures are due to be adopted by February 7th. DRPT's 6-year improvement program was published on our website on December 9th. Available there, folks want to take a look at what we've awarded in the way of funding and grants on the transit side of things. Our current grant cycle for transit grants, this is capital operating along with some of our specialty grants like technical assistance, is open, and we have a deadline of February 1st for those grant applications to be submitted and completed. There's a federal COVID relief bill that includes some transit related funding. This is very similar to what we saw in the CARES Act. More details are to come. For the Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, DRPT continues efforts to stand up that authority. They have a scheduled meeting on January 25th of the board. Additional information on VPRAs on our website. There are a lot of exciting things kind of happening around that and the rail initiatives, ongoing negotiations, and things related to kind of all those big announcements that you've heard related to Virginia's historic growing of their rail investment and rail program. That's pretty much all of my updates for January.
Thanks, Wood. Bill, got any updates from EVA?
Nothing major to report. We're going to start classes up again starting at the beginning of February. And I don't know, I can't even tell you if the buses have been UTS been operating on a different schedule than they were when classes are in session, but I do know that it's highly modified from our normal operations, and taking buses off of McCormick Road for the time being in terms of where students are able to kind of go from where they live to grounds. And the reason for that is to avoid the large crowds that tend to occur on McCormick Road as people wait for buses. So I do know ridership for UTS down significantly because of so many people not coming to grounds for classes, though they are taking classes, just not on grounds. And then most of the bus logistics and operations are geared towards getting employees from where they park, if they have to be on grounds, to especially the health system. So be my main updates.
Take that as a no. Chuck, any other VDOT updates for us?
I'm still trying to figure out how I'm going to do all this smart scale work, but no, not really.
Great. It's a good problem to have.
Definitely floored by this.
And Juwan, any CAT updates? I saw you guys put out your RFP for the automated passenger counters.
Yeah, I was gonna say we have quite a few things going on, but that's probably one of the bigger ones. The APC, the automatic passenger counters, should be on board in a few months. Well, no, we should have the contract awarded in a couple months or so. But yeah, a lot of the other projects, you know, like I said, we have a consultant on board looking at our routes and schedules and how to tweak that. Also, you know, McCormick Road is hurting us as well. Our trolley ridership has fallen drastically due to that. But some of the more times to previously mentioned stuff, in looking at tweaking our routes, we've noticed that we are able to reduce loop times just because there's less traffic on the road. So, you know, I think we're all kind of operating on, yeah, COVID's going to go away at some point and we'll be back to quote unquote normal. But what is normal? And I guess that's something I don't know if anyone can predict, but we're trying to keep our eyes and ears open for how to handle that when it comes. But we're chugging along. Yeah, passengers counts are low, but you know, I think that's just nationwide. But yeah.
Cool. Thanks. Jeanette, do you have any updates from the city?
Well, we awarded the 4, what do you call it, State of Good Repair bridge. So you're going to start seeing some movement on that. It is allowed to be scheduled for over a year on the 4 bridges. So just be aware of that. And then Belmont has just been advertised, which is super exciting. And now that we have funding for West Main, looks like City Council has a difficult decision on their hands. So this is wonderful.
Definitely. I've got nothing to add to that. Yeah. TJPDC staff, anything to add?
I don't have anything to add. Sandy, Lucinda, Christine.
The only other thing that I thought I had mentioned in light of Tim, your comments about the longer trail is that there is a regional effort underway to evaluate our participation throughout this region, including in the rural areas of the 3-notch trail. So at this point, the TJPDC, we're kind of not really in the lead role on that, since it's not really clear what our participation would be right now. It seems like it's much more of a recreational trail effort versus a transportation corridor. So we don't have a well-defined role at this point, but we are supporting the efforts that are underway. There's a lot more that's going on with the Parks and Rec staff are a lot more plugged into that right now. But as we do our long-range transportation planning updates, including the rural long-range plan update, we'll make sure that any recommendations that will support that get included. And if there emerges a more, I don't know, specific way that we can support it that fits within sort of our scope of what we do as an agency, we'll certainly be open to that. But otherwise, Jessica most likely will be staying informed and be providing our sort of support for that effort.
Thanks. You know, there are just a number of things that are in flux in these times. We know that the governor's put in his budget the money to support the 2 really long length trails in the state. And with UVA Foundation putting all of the land Morven East under conservation easement, then there's a great connector piece possibility along 795 that would connect a lot of the way, the potential for connecting a lot of the way from Morven back to Monticello. And you all are aware of studies that UVA classes have done in the recent past about that. So just things, because again, you're the regional planning, and because we're talking about the Fluvanna component of that as well to be thinking about. I certainly understand the distinction between those that we hope are going to be commuting and those that aren't. And you know, in terms of that staffing at Monticello, historically there have been staff members at Monticello that have commuted from Belmont to Monticello daily to work. A number of the archaeologists in the past.
Sure.
Cool. Well, did I miss anyone? I don't think so.
I think I might have not heard you call my name, but no major updates at Jaunt at this time. Budget season's in high swing and we're just trying to get through that.
Great. Well, thanks so much, everybody. With that, I'll adjourn this meeting. Have a great day.
Thank you, Rory.